go.
All right. Welcome to the Undead Sages podcast, where we take advantage of AI to talk to long dead wise men and women. Today we are actually on the graveyard, and we'll be talking about a few of our previous episodes live. And with me here is my good friend, philosopher friend, living philosopher friend, Arne Willee. And my name is Merijn de Haen, and let's go. Let's have at it.
Thank you, Merijn, for having me here on the Undead Sages podcast. I'm thrilled, and being here at the graveyard, discussing some dead sages.
Yeah. So in the past few weeks, we've had Nagarjuna, Arthur Schopenhauer, Simone de Beauvoir, and Marcus Aurelius.
May I?
Sure, go ahead.
I think kind of like we had Simone de Beauvoir, Nagarjuna, Schopenhauer, and Albert Camus.
Albert Camus? Okay, yeah. Yeah, because he was only published today, right? Yeah.
Yes, that's
you're right. You're right.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, I keep it up to date.
Yeah, very good. Okay, let's go with those four then. So we're here in a live location, as you can hear by the trains going by. This is a very nice cemetery right in the heart of Utrecht. So we're having a lot of noise along here with us as well.
And it's the day after Halloween, it's not all quiet here.
Is that the Day of the Dead? The Dia de los Muertos? Do you know?
I'm not sure.
Nor am
I don't think so. But yeah, like the four philosophers of the last kind of like 2 weeks that were on the podcast, we want to discuss and see if we find some connections to our life and our times right now.
Yeah.
Where we have some connections. I want to point out something that we found compelling and wanted to point out very subjectively.
Yeah.
Let me maybe start with kind of like putting all four philosophers like in the sack, like together, and mix them up. Like they are very kind of like different philosophers, right? We have Simone de Beauvoir, 20th century. We have Nagarjuna, an old Indian sage. Schopenhauer, 19th century. Albert Camus, 20th century.
Right.
And I was kind of like thinking about, man, what do have these philosophers, like how can we actually talk about them all at once? And I was thinking a little bit about it, and I was seeing kind of like, I see two kind of like different, or like two sides where we could like put them in. What I think about is kind of like Simone de Beauvoir. Her thinking evolves around society and political impacts, right? Like the otherness. What does it mean? And I think kind of this ties also in with Albert Camus, whose thinking is also kind of like highly political.
Yes, much more about the whole than about the individual.
Yeah.
And if they're talking about the individual at all, it's about how the individual fits into the whole.
Yeah. So I say kind of like in this constellation, those two would be saying in the same corner. On the other corner, I see Schopenhauer and Nagarjuna, who both kind of like are very much interested in kind of like the metaphysical truths to see in the world. Like not so much about the politics kind of like and what to do with society. This is kind of like not their business. They are more interested in kind of like, what lies behind it all, right?
Yeah. I like the distinction you made there between the philosophers who care about the life of the individual and how to live a good life, and the ones who care more about how do we create a society that is healthy for all individuals. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, in the end, as with every profound thinker, and they're all profound thinkers, the question for deeper understanding always has to be kind of like thought through towards what does it mean for my life, for our life.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the major force of philosophy, right? How can I apply this to my own life? Yeah.
But what would you think, kind of like talking about now, for example, Schopenhauer? Would you think, kind of like he has something like his interest that he has shown on the podcast ties back into a also like a teaching for other people to bear with life and to maybe remind people on the podcast, Schopenhauer thinking that everything is the whole world we're part of is kind of like driven by this blind will.
Yeah,
right?
basically he's saying we're all like puppets who dance to the strings of some unseen force, perhaps even of biology, that makes us makes us almost like passengers. Almost, if we can see that we are passengers, we are still unable to do anything about it. And Schopenhauer says the only thing you can realistically hope for is that you are able to feel transcendence at one point or another, or with regular intervals in your life. And his prescription for that would be to seek out art, and especially music, because
Yes.
it bypasses all the cognitive filters that our eyes do have, but our ears don't. So,
Well put.
yeah, basically he says music is a main line to your emotions, and thereby also to your ability for transcendence.
Yeah. Like listen to music for transcendence is of course like good tip, right? Actually, now that you were that we are talking about Schopenhauer, I see also another connection to Albert Camus, because where Schopenhauer kind of like sees, kind of like gets to a pessimistic outlook, being kind of like thrown into this maelstrom of phenomena, which kind of like all are in the end are just like suffering in the end, right?
Yeah,
And we
yeah.
cannot escape. Albert Camus actually comes like from the similar starting point, and then like comes up with a great idea. Hey, actually, it's also all a big joke. It's the absurd.
Yeah, so here's a guy who has seen like the First World War, where he lost his dad, and then the Second World War, where he was actually involved in the French resistance against the Nazis. Then the development and deployment of the atomic bomb. And he came to the conclusion that basically we're all just insects on this mass of planet that can just shrug us off at any particular point, and yet we are hardwired to look for meaning and for a certain type of meaning in our lives, right? And yet this doesn't make him particularly pessimistic. No, he pulls it into the absurd. He says life is absurd, and where the only thing we can do is just live a good life, try to live a good life and that is, according to Camus, we should be in touch with our environment. We should be open to the transcendence afforded by that environment, and we should also be open to the necessities of the people around us.
Yeah.
It's a very connected way of seeing the world, and we have to do that even though life is absurd.
Yes.
It's a very different prescription from the one that Schopenhauer
Yeah.
laid before.
Where kind of like Schopenhauer turns kind of like inward to himself and kind of tries to deal with also kind of the sign of like absurdness of the life his diagnosis comes up with. He turns inward and tries to see like how do I deal with this and try to transcend it, for example by listening to music. And Camus kind of has still kind of like the strive to not leaning into the total pessimistic outlook.
Nihilism, basically. Yeah.
Nihilism, yes. Well, one could argue you can be kind of like a nihilist and not being a pessimist. Maybe when Nietzsche comes on our podcast, on your podcast, maybe we can have a little bit more about that.
Ah, it's very interesting. Yeah, I haven't talked to him yet.
But is he on the list?
He is on the list. He's definitely on the list, and I think he breaches maybe Schopenhauer and Camus a little bit.
Ah, yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Although I do want to say one
Yes,
more
please.
thing about the juxtaposition of these two guys, because it also seems to me, but maybe that is just my personal impression, that their philosophies are highly personal as well. It seems like Camus was also a really extroverted person, an outgoing man. He grew up without language in his life, but he had such a will to live, such a zest for life that he managed to excel despite having such humble beginnings. Whereas Schopenhauer, he's from a very wealthy, very good family, and his father provides him with a top-notch education, sends him all over Europe to learn everything there is to know about the world. But his father kills himself. At least that's what Schopenhauer himself seems to think. And he himself seems to be rather an introverted person who tends to be pessimistic and tends to look on the glum side of life more than the positive side of life. And then maybe the two particular philosophies they gel really well with their personalities, right?
Oh yeah, I think there's a big point to be made to take personalities into account when we're talking about thinkers. There are some hardcore analytical philosophers who think kind of like, oh no, I don't want to know anything about the life of a philosopher.
Oh, right.
And I just want to read the clean, pure text and thoughts. But I think kind of like this, there is no such thing as the clean, pure thought. It's all embedded in the biographies and the characters, as you said. I don't want to say that kind of like the characters, like that the biography will supersede the thoughts, but it can help to see kind of like what temperament is behind the individual philosopher.
And then also what accident is there inherent in the philosophy? Because should the philosopher have had a little bit of a different temperament, perhaps their philosophy would have looked differently.
Oh yeah.
And then of course we're not looking for truth, but we're looking for why is this philosophy as it is, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is what these analytical philosophers are maybe trying to do. They're not looking for truth, I think.
Well,
or maybe they are. I don't know.
Well, maybe you can also add to the list Wittgenstein to have like something. Like even talk a little bit about it, kind of like as one of the fathers of analytical philosophy. But maybe let me segue to another one of the thinkers here by just making a short remark on also Schopenhauer's father. So Schopenhauer's father also kind of like was this kind of patriarchal figure, one of these big overbearing patriarchs, and
like Logan Paul. Have you seen Succession?
I have.
Yeah.
I have. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Logan Roy.
Sorry,
not Logan Paul. Sorry.
Yeah, we are on the internet.
I don't even know what the other person is like, but yeah. Okay,
yeah.
so Logan Roy.
Yeah.
Or the father of Donald Trump, maybe.
Or the father of Franz Kafka, or like lots of these big father figures with the authority, and where you have especially problems with, like, if you're a sensitive person like Schopenhauer himself was.
Yeah.
But yeah, so maybe you know where my segue is going to. It's to Simone de Beauvoir, like taking a stance against this overbearing, overpowered societal side, where kind of like over centuries men have freedom on the cost, in this case, also of the women in society.
Yeah, very, very true. Yeah, it seemed like she was just as Camus was very much influenced by the two world wars and the atomic bomb. So was she, and she was very much part of the existentialist movement.
Yes,
but then also from a very very strong realization that not only was she vulnerable from the almost the absurd side, the existential side, but also she was vulnerable from her gender side, as she was very much aware that she was living in a man's world.
Yeah.
And her question was, how did this come about, basically? How did this happen?
Yeah.
And I think she came up with a compelling argument that described how patriarchy, as we now call it, has formed, and how it has been pernicious in the lives of many women and others who are not in charge. Right?
Yeah, and I think kind of like it's for us nowadays very hard to imagine why kind of like finding out that, for example, women are kind of like had to struggle for their rights, for equal rights and recognition for work they do, for example, which was taken for granted.
Mm-hmm.
So like nowadays we think like, yes, of course it's the case, because we are living already kind of like long into several movements in society that we are very much aware of this. But at the time of Simone de Beauvoir, I think it wasn't that much the case. It definitely wasn't common sense. And I think what I wanted to say here is that thinking and thinkers are so powerful because they can point out a dogma and then also like turn it around.
Yeah.
The dogma being here kind of like, oh yeah, there is a place in society for men and women, and that's your place and that's your place.
Right. It's like, almost like artists who can also do this by pointing to something like a toilet bowl, just putting the toilet bowl in the middle of an exposition space and then saying, okay, so what do you think? Right.
Well, you're referring to Marcel Duchamp, which also is also a very interesting story about suppression of the female in this piece of art.
Is there?
Because actually a woman artist made this.
No way.
Yes, made this, and he just handed it in.
Ah.
Yeah. You would. The more you know. Like it's.
Right.
I don't have the name at hand right now, but yeah, look it up. Interesting, like also in Simone de Beauvoir, she is talking a lot about kind of like the other and othering.
Yeah.
Othering that we also kind of still like is in our nowadays vocabulary big, like so kind of reducing somebody to
A stereotype.
Yeah, to the other, like to the other in a negative sense, because being other isn't negative from the beginning. It's just kind of like a phenomenological description. actually also like what also Edmund Husserl, the big phenomenologist in the also 20th century, kind of like used to describe that we kind of like also need the other to
define ourselves.
Yes, and to kind of like actually have something of a intersubjective connection, like kind of like getting out of our head in a sense, and coming up to a communication with the world and the other.
Right.
And so yeah, those are big points in Simone de Beauvoir's philosophy, the other and othering.
Yes, very true. I think we talked about this, and she explained how she came up with it, and I don't think in our conversation she didn't make this particular distinction between the neutral other and the pernicious use of the concept or of the stereotype to belittle somebody or to put them in a box or to do something with him or her. I wasn't aware of Mr. Husserl's work on the subject, but very interesting.
Yeah, well, I just feel free to drop everything if I find a connection and find it interesting. Let's talk a little bit about the fourth thinker in this group, Nagarjuna. Maybe Merijn, you can refresh our memory a little bit, because I think from the four, this name is maybe the least known in our minds at the time.
Yeah, he's a Buddhist philosopher of whom very little is known. The scientists are convinced that there was a person who has written the things that he is being attributed with, and basically what he's known for is to bring back, in a sense, the Buddha's original teachings on dependent origination, which is the way that suffering is created in life. So the original Buddha said, not only is there no self to you, but there's to every phenomenon. It also does not have inherent existence. And what is inherent existence? That means that it stands alone. It doesn't need anything else in order to exist.
Yeah.
And the discovery of this in Buddhist soteriology, which is the theory of becoming free from suffering or free from the ailments of life. So in Buddhist theory, becoming aware of this lack of inherent existence, so interdependence, you can also call it interdependence, that can make you free, because now you don't take yourself all that seriously. What happened in the intervening years, or decades, or even centuries between the Buddha's life and Nagarjuna's existence and writings, what happened was that Buddhism as a philosophy became more and more philosophical, because it was surrounded by Hindu thought and by Jain thought, which is other thought streams in ancient India, who asked of the Buddhist, well, how do you, let's just a random example, how do you how do you understand water to be wet and capable of extinguishing a fire or quenching your thirst, if there is not something inherent in water that is able to do that? So then Buddhists...
Kind of like a form of essentialism.
Essentialism, exactly, yeah. So that is what the Buddhist philosophers came up with two different sorts of arguments that went basically against the Buddhist description of a lack of inherent existence and everything is interdependent. So what Nagarjuna basically did was say, no, they're all wrong. It's not essential. There is no essential element in anything. There is just chance, basically, that makes water water and fire fire. And the fact that you think that you have inherent existence, that is also a chance event. It is a misunderstanding of the fundamental nature of how phenomena work. And the fundamental nature of how phenomena work, he says, is in interdependence. Everything is dependent on everything else. And so it's not that one cause leads to the next in isolation. It is that multiple causes give rise to multiple other causes.
Yes.
And they all are connected to each other in a large web that can hardly be seen apart from itself.
I think this is kind of like, for me, also like the major thought, and because during his podcast episode, I had, like, oftentimes I was very riddled by his claims, right? That we kind of like, we cannot say that this and this depends on that and that, but actually, because it sounded kind of like, okay, he's just saying without a systematic framework that we cannot tell how it is, but it's not as easy. It is, as what you pointed out, like there is not like one single cause that goes to the next one, right?
Yeah.
And
that's
so,
exactly it. Yeah.
Yes, and I think this makes much sense. And tying this back to Schopenhauer, who also kind of like drew heavily from Indian philosophy, right?
Yeah.
Like all his kind of like metaphysics and everything he's doing is actually coming from the, I never know kind of like how to pronounce it, Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, so I think he drew from both Hinduism, which is the Bhagavad Gita is Hindu.
Yes.
And also in his slightly later in life, he drew more from Buddhism.
Yeah. Yeah, like he was actually at the forefront, because lots of these works were just kind of like available for people in Europe who like, because they were translated, I guess, like I don't know which language first, but he could access them very early on and integrated them. And interestingly, he comes up with he wouldn't share Nagarjuna's idea of how the phenomena are forming. He has like a very strict idea of how the causalities are working. Like he's also on the top of his day of natural sciences.
Yes.
And he's saying like, well, it's all cause and effect.
It's almost as if he's channeling Darwin, right, with his will.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I wanted to ask him that, but there wasn't time.
How so?
He
I'm
had plans
interested
for
in
the
that.
night. Sorry?
How would he challenge Darwin?
Well, not challenge, but channel.
A channel.
Yeah. So I think he was really on a similar sort of path of discovery, where or maybe Darwin borrowed from him a little bit. I don't know whether this is true or not. I'm just saying that there is something in Schopenhauer's will that is eerily reminiscent of the theory of evolution and the unseen force that Darwin also sort of postulates of natural selection.
Interesting.
Right?
Interesting. I didn't think about this. For me, kind of like there is another connection between the work of Schopenhauer and another great thinker, which is kind of like the world as a will and perception. Is it called perception?
Vorstellung. Representation.
Representation. Yeah. The world as will and representation by Schopenhauer. So the thoughts there are definitely have been taken up and not quoted and credited for by Sigmund Freud.
No way.
When he comes up with his book about analysis of dreams.
I talked to Freud about this, not specifically about his connection to the thoughts of
Well,
Schopenhauer.
he wouldn't maybe admitted it because he doesn't admit it in his work. Like there is no Schopenhauer to be found, but we know that he read Schopenhauer, and of course, like all his ideas about the subconscious, like also like a dark will that we are not being aware of, that kind of like actually guides us towards also all kinds of things that we would, as a civilized, conscious being in society, would think of. Oh no. We can't. This is not what I am doing. No,
can't be me.
Can't be me. Yeah. Yes. This is drawing strongly on Schopenhauer.
Very interesting. So can you, because you were actually trying to, I think, make a different point about the causes, the single causes and conditions that are dependent on them, versus a web of causes that link together.
Yes.
Okay.
I think Schopenhauer like has he introduced a huge swath of vocabulary in his writings, and he's talking about the ayatology, kind of like of the way, kind of like how one object in movement changes into a different state, kind of like, which is all about and those are kind of like all in our world as representation in which we are in, and the world as representation is he comes here from Immanuel Kant, and he is one of the best readers of Immanuel Kant, and writes a great review and critique of Immanuel Kant in his book The World as Will and Representation. Really on point. Also criticizes him. So where he comes from Kant is kind of like, what we see through the ways we can actually only access the world, which is kind of like, for example, time and space.
Right.
And time and space isn't inherent to the things, which I guess like where Nagarjuna would also like say like, why wouldn't they, right?
He agrees with that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we put them on the world. And so kind of like...
they're artifacts of our perception of the world. Basically.
Yes.
And our limitations of perception.
Yes. But this is kind of like where with this so-called Copernicanian called change, revolution, where kind of like that Immanuel Kant has kind of saying like, we have to look in our faculties of the mind, and from there we have to see how we perceive the world, what we project onto the world.
Right.
Schopenhauer isn't satisfied to just like stay there. He says like there's something underlying.
Right.
And so kind of like he does say like, all right, we have like the world of perception, which is kind of totally under causality, right? Mm-hmm. He says, actually the metaphysics behind it all is everything is one. And
so Neoplatonic, is that a word?
Neoplatonic is a word.
No.
I'm sure if I'm actually not too familiar with Neoplatonism, but it's definitely, I think, also something from Buddhist philosophy. Everything is one, right? I'm not sure.
There is definite Buddhist traditions that are non-dual. That don't say everything is one, but they also say it's not two, right? There's a subtle difference there. It's maybe a bit difficult to get into now.
Yes.
But please go ahead.
I'll just finish it. So kind of like, so the underlying truth is everything is one. Mm-hmm. Like you and me, the stone on the wall where the microphone is standing, the leaves. Everything in this world is one. Right. And so kind of like now, and what is this one thing? The one thing is the blind striving will.
Right, okay.
All right, so okay. And now comes like the fun part, if you may, through time and space, which Schopenhauer calls the principium individuationis. We are getting splintered up in like these mirror images that kind of like make us appear we are individuals outside, or like we are a multitude. We are independent from each other.
Interesting.
But actually it's only kind of like in this perception. And so kind of like he adds, to maybe get back to it, like he adds to what Immanuel Kant is saying, like, all right, there is kind of like the phenomena. The phenomena are like in our perceptive stages, time and space, which are also then everything we can perceive is like in a causal connection, right? He agrees with it, but he kind of like adds to it kind of like a foundational metaphysics on its ground.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like everything is actually one. Everything is one, the one strong will.
And that's the will, and that's inescapable, or apart from slight moments of transcendence.
Yes,
right?
and the human being in his it's a systematic philosophy, and there are kind of hierarchies, and the human being is kind of still in this philosophy at the top point of the hierarchy. Why is this? Because the human being is the only being, he says, that where the will can recognize itself in a mirror image and see the blind will in itself. And when we can see that we are the blind will, the will kind of vanish.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So like, oh, well, what do you think about that?
That's very interesting. It's very interesting. So actually, he does the basic. I see a basic pattern of religion here, of Christianity, where it's being posited. There is one superpower that underlies everything, that has created everything, and that will be maybe there after we are here. But humans are in his creation, but have are unique in a sense that they are able to choose between right and wrong. Right? There's a mirror image. Do you see that also?
In Schopenhauer?
Yeah. In the philosophy you just outlined.
Well,
of the will being this one supernatural.
I wouldn't say it's supernatural for him. It's just kind of the underlying cause nobody sees, and it's not supernatural in a sense in Christianity that there's a higher being or like a deity where we kind of strive for some good. Actually, kind of for him, it's more kind of like we are in this, we are captured in this never-ending wheel of torture, which this is here, because we suffer only the whole time, and we can only escape it when we see what's underlying, and we stop striving, we stop turning around. So I wouldn't say there is something
but he's also pessimistic about doing that in any structural or permanent way to escape it.
He has some things to say about it. I'll be quick. On the one point, or point one would be, he doesn't believe in a ongoing free will. So kind of like doing something good or bad isn't in our hands. There's only for him it's a very specific case. I told you about it before. Yeah. It's very interesting. There's only one act.
When we take birth, right? We can choose to.
Yes, so there's only one act of free will we have. Before we are being born, we choose our own character. It's like a very funny, like mind-blowing idea.
Quite supernatural in most people's sense, right?
Yes, and also kind of like now that I just said like, oh, there's only like the one blind striving will, where do we like all things are popping up, but let's just go with it. And so we chose our character, and then we're on this world here where everything is kind of like cause and effect. So we don't have actually any chance of doing something good or bad, because it's just like playing out in a very mechanistic way, in a sense. except if we can kind of like try to break through with kind of like this meditation.
Just looking in the mirror, as you say.
Yeah, just looking in the mirror, listen to the music, which also like pulls us out from this wheel of suffering. This is the one thing I want to say. I forgot the other one.
About the will being a supernatural force.
As I say, like I wouldn't say it is a supernatural force because it's just like it's the underlying metaphysical force. And maybe to add to this is he also like talks in his writings about becoming like what about the holy man? What about the hermit? Also as ways to kind of like deal with the problematic that we have to face in this existence.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So those are kind of like similar. Also, no, I wouldn't say similar too, but those are kind of like some forms of life he identifies where people tried to deal with this existential setup, and
to just live away from society and go your own way, basically.
Yeah.
As a hermit. Yeah, it's very interesting. It's very interesting philosophy, I think. But I do see some. I do see some parallels with. Once you say, okay, so there's only one force that pervades everything, and everything is an emanation, basically, of that force. This rock is an emanation of this force. This mic we're talking into is an emanation of this force. Underneath it all, we're all one. You and me, we are one. We just don't see it.
Yes.
When we don't see it because of the personalizing or individuating effects of space and time, as Schopenhauer, I think you said, right?
Yeah.
So through that prism of space and time, we become individual, which, but below that we are the will, and then what?
Nothing.
Then what?
We are all the will. The will is the will stays always one, always striving. Nothing is going on.
So I'm reminded then of Spinoza's concept of God, that is inherent and distributed throughout nature, but is not a personal God, right?
Yeah, that's true. But maybe Merijn, maybe Spinoza, we keep for another episode.
Very good. We've been going for 40 minutes, over 40 minutes. So you're right. You're very right.
Let's wrap it up.
To wrap it up here. Yeah.
It was fun.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining. We've had a lot of fun talking, and I hope it was fun for you as well. We aim to do one of these at least once a month, and maybe twice a month. So we'll keep you posted on the channel.